months ago, I thought I would be delivering a talk on my unprecedented experiences in my almost 18 years of living. A talk on my unconventional views on the phenomenons and realities of human experience. 2 months ago, I thought I would stand on this stage and begin by narrating what I thought to be one of the most harrowing nights of my life. A night and an experience that has taken me nearly 4 years to simply begin to learn to live with. A story of how a 14 turning 15-year-old Anoushka, who was living void of any GCSE or IB stress, gorgeous, who had just joined WSO, a new school, with her best friend of 7 years. A story of how she embarked on her first international school trip, a jovial teenager, and returned a shattered one. A story of Florida's terrible humidity. You know, the one that makes you resemble a disheveled Chewbacca? And that's a compliment. A story of how I received a call in that same Florida heat at 4:52 a.m., and my mother said the words, "Bisterna has died." The same Bisterna that I knew for 7 years, the same Bisterna that I grew up with, joined WSO with, the same Bisterna that I shared a teenager's romantic pain and an undying love for Justin Bieber. I was going to begin with a story of relevance, a story of self-development, realization, acceptance, a story of a paradigmatic mind shift that taught me to learn from a loss. But just 2 months ago, someone pressed that reset button, and it all happened again. Nobody thinks they're going to die. It's true. You might refute it with the brutal candor of biology, but almost everybody lives each day believing in a tomorrow. Whether it's avoiding a piece of homework and leaving it for the next day, ignoring your parents after a fight with all hopes to reconcile the next morning, or applying to university to pursue your dream career. Our minds and this world runs on a momentous cycle, where one thing builds on another as we grow with age or experience, where time stops for nobody, where our actions have consequences, and what happened a minute ago will affect what happens in the next few. Nobody avoids giving out consequences, because if we all lived each day as our last, we wouldn't believe in consequences. But we do. We give out late detentions, set deadlines, have arguments, or teach our children valuable lessons because nobody thinks they're going to die. And nobody comes close to thinking a loved one is going to die until it happens. Death, a word that makes me uncomfortable, makes many uncomfortable, but a tragedy that most view with the pleasure of a spectator seat and a smokescreen of shared condolences until it happens to them. Because it happened again. 2 months ago, it happened for the third time. 2 months ago, I lost a best friend. My best friend. Another best friend. I lost Vishal to a car accident. Someone who plays the piano while I sing, someone who kicks my knees in just to laugh at me losing my balance, and someone who listens to my hardships and reminds me that he thought I was strong. A strength that I'm not sure I possess any longer, because not after losing 3 best friends at the ages of 7, 14, and 17, because no amount of beautifully written words, poems, or TED Talks can do them justice, can do Chelsea, Bisterna, Vishal, can do my pain justice. Tonight's theme is Control, Alt, Delete. So I'm going to break down the sustenance of life-changing incidents, of trauma, of grief, how this one experience can either break or shape you, and how this impact can possibly be up to you. It feels peculiar repeating my own words, but I truly do believe this. We live in a world where explanation is key. We as human beings strive to learn. We break things down, make them comprehensible, whether it's the stages of mitosis or the stages of grief. We like to synthesize simple explanations for complicated things. We like to believe that somewhere out there, someone has the answers to everything. Someone has it all figured out. It's why we seek advice. It's why we vent to our friends, simply go to school, or attend TED Talks. Because we like to make informed decisions. We want to make sure that whatever is happening and whatever we choose to do about it is right. And that's why when I found out my best friend was in a coma, I scavenged for that explanation, that why, that undo button. Because none of it made sense. It still doesn't make sense. But we all have these buttons, these functions that help us filter through our everyday lives, the good and the bad, the happy and the sad. They help us figure out what deserves our energy and what doesn't. But we also have a limited number of scenarios we can actually use them in. So when I found out Vishal was fighting for his life, when I think about my best friend not sitting in the audience today, I press Control, Alt, Refresh. Our first button of the evening. The button you press when you're faced with a situation that makes you go, huh? A situation where regardless of times, regardless of how many times you shake your head in disbelief, the page just doesn't load up. You can't process it. Some call it a nightmare, some call it surreal. So you refresh and refresh and refresh. But your brain just keeps going, error 404, emotional reaction not found. You have nothing to say and nothing to do. This button is just being pressed over and over and over. But this button can be pressed not just in times of tragedy, but in times of unexpected reward too. You just received an A on a test that you thought you were going to fail. Control, Alt, Refresh, huh? But it's moments like when you don't know if you're going to see your best friend again. Control, Alt, Refresh, huh? But that's the funny thing about life, a momentous cycle where actions have consequences and some things just happen. Life goes on and you're still, huh? Now, many might question how I went from a Windows function to unparalleled chapters of my life. But you see, the thing is, one incident can fundamentally transform the very foundation of a person's character. Their markup, their intricate wiring that makes up their personality that's built upon an accumulation of past experiences, all uprooted because of one reality, one incident, and all has changed forever. And these unprecedented incidents aren't limited to grief. It's anything that moves you, that jolts your entire school of thought, that questions your systems of reality, that makes you stop for a second or two while the world just goes by and forces you to see things differently with a different lens of perception. But sometimes we aren't ready to process this change. The world goes on and you want to too, but the tab just doesn't load up in the Google Chrome of your mind. So you just Control, Alt, minimize. Our second button of this evening, the button of ignorance, a temporary tool of indifference. But there's a reason that I call it minimize. Because nothing you ignore ever truly goes away. Like a minimize tab on your screen. Whether it's that assignment you procrastinated up until the very last minute, I know you've been there, or a grave experience that you just can't deal with right now, or ever. it all comes back to bite you sooner or later. Because this tool of indifference, this button, it's on a timer, similar to your snooze button on your alarm. You can press it and get those extra few minutes of sleep, but your alarm will startle you sooner or later. And you can press it again, but eventually you will have to wake up. Use this button cautiously, I say, because depending on the nature of the event, this button can prove to be unhealthy. But it works. Trust me, I know it does. The simple hope that we could all smack Vishal when he wakes up by pressing Control-Alt-Minimize is what got me through 3 days of uncertainty. And it's not that when you use this button, you're in denial or you don't care. It's just that sometimes you can't. Your mind settles in a place where it's not able to put together this jigsaw puzzle of pieces that seem to be all different shapes, sizes, and colors. And it just doesn't make any sense. But sometimes the multiple tabs that we opened and didn't load up load up all at once. On the 6th day of Vishal's fight, I woke up to find my mother at my bedside with that solemn look plastered over her face. I knew what was up, but I Control-Alt-Minimized and asked her what. He didn't make it, she said. But all I heard was a repetitive series of no's leaving my mouth and my Control-Alt-Refresh button going crazy. But in that moment, the page did load up. And I realized that I had lost him, that my minimize tab was now exploded in front of my eyes, and my snooze button no longer working, and the alarm blaring in my ears. In that moment, I got it. And when we finally get it, we press Control-Alt-Zoom. This button perfectly ties in with that momentous cycle of life and actions having consequences because things happen. We cry, we scream, we laugh, action, reaction. We zoom in, we amplify. We work ourselves up and convince ourselves it truly is the end of the world, and anyone who tells you otherwise just doesn't get it. I know how it feels, and I know you do too. Now, the funny thing about these buttons is the fact that they usually don't work in isolation. You know that assignment you press Control-Alt-Minimize on by leaving it for the next day? Yeah, it's a 4,000-word extended essay, and it's now due tomorrow. Control-Alt-Zoom, now you're freaking out. But this button is usually the go-to button. But it's the button that often makes us lose sense or sight of this bigger picture everyone keeps talking about, the long run. This button can occasionally make us forget that at the end of the day, it will be okay. But this button isn't subhuman. It's emotion. It isn't overreacting. Far from it. Because we act and react how we feel, how we've processed it, how we think the consequences this something holds for us will impact us. And if that's not human, I don't know what is. Monumental incidents have the potential to make an individual meet the world with a different eye, with an altered lens of perception. Some may call it post-traumatic stress, or some may even call it the best day of their lives. Some may prefer not to give it a label. You see things in a different light. You digest it differently. Therefore, you behave differently. It only makes sense. We call this digestion emotion, how we take something, how it impacts us, and what chord it strikes within our psyche. And depending on the chord it strikes, we use a different button. Refresh, zoom, minimize for later, or one of the other hundreds of buttons I haven't mentioned tonight. And these buttons don't work in a systematic order, regardless of the situation at hand. We're all human. We change our minds, we close up, we put up walls, we open up, and we go do things out of our comfort zone. We simply be human. And we humans are thrown a curveball sometimes. We face unanticipated circumstances. For me, one of these circumstances were losing my best friend or friends. For you, it might be the divorce of your parents, or not getting into the national football team, or being made redundant. Or it can be something entirely positive, like that dream job halfway across the world. And when we're faced with these unanticipated circumstances, we hop onto this emotional airplane that we don't know how to fly. So we press all these buttons, back and forth, refresh, zoom, minimize, zoom, in all hopes that we'll somehow gain control of this airplane, of this unstable emotional airplane, learn how to steer it in the right direction with no collateral damage, and land it at the healthy emotional airport. And sometimes we gain sight of the switch. Control, Alt, Accept. Now I call it a switch and not a button because of the unpredictable nature of switches. They trip at any given time without any warnings, because that's the volatile nature of acceptance, of human emotion. You believe it one day, and then you don't. When someone experiences something completely uncalled for, they board that emotional airplane and finally flip the Control, Alt, Accept switch. When someone reaches that ability to finally even comprehend the idea of acceptance, the world smacks you hard on the concrete floors of reality. And you just miss your best friends. But that is what many call life. We choose what defines us and what doesn't. We choose the experiences and the people that we carry forward with us, and we choose the experiences and the people that we learn from and not leave behind, because I always say advice and people and experiences are like a piece of paper. You can cut around it and choose what parts to keep and what parts to learn from. And over time, we learn how to gain control of these control buttons. We learn how to control the emotional airplane and make these right decisions. But sometimes we can unlearn and we can lose control. And we're left in a place where the world is going on and we just want to press pause. But we carry on. We go on, one day at a time, one moment at a time, because that's the beauty of it all. That is human experience. Thank you very much. My name is Anoushka Gaur. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.